In the second half of Chapter 6, we're going to learn how to solve quadratic equations. So we've already kind of looked at questions like these. So let's say I have 3x squared equals 300 and I want to solve for x. This one's relatively easy because there's already only one term of x, so it's easier to get x by itself. How I do this, I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides, and then to get rid of that square, I'm going to square root. And remember, when I square root, I can have a positive or negative root. So x would equal plus or minus 10, again, because 10 squared equals 100. Negative 10 squared also equals positive 100. But what if I have a question like this? X squared plus 5x plus 16 equals 10, and I want to solve for x. This question becomes a lot harder because I can't combine that x squared and x terms. So again, in the second half of this chapter, all we're really going to learn is different methods to solve a question like this. Today, we're going to focus on factoring. So to do that, we're going to learn about something called the zero product property, which sounds fancier than it really is. For any real numbers a and b, if a times b equals 0, then a equals 0 or b equals 0. So it's really kind of going off that fact that 0 times anything is just 0. So for example, if I have the equation x plus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0, then that would mean that x plus 3 equals 0 or x plus 2 equals 0. Really, all of this is saying is that if we can get an equation in factored form, then we can solve it, or that's like a method to solve it. So for example, let's solve 4x plus 1 times x minus 2 equals 0. What's nice about this problem is that it's already in factored form. So from here, I'm going to use that zero product property, and how you might want to think about this is just separating out the parentheses. So 4x plus 1 could equal 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. Now I'm going to solve for x separately, like two different equations, and I'll get two answers. Remember that when we're working with quadratics, you can have two solutions. So at most two solutions. We'll look at ones that have one solution today as well, but a lot of times you'll have two. So I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides for this first problem. I have 4x equals negative 1. Last step, I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides, and I'm left with x equals negative 1/4. And for the other equation, I'm going to just add 2 on both sides, and I'm left with x equals 2. And those would be both of my solutions. Now to double check, I could plug either negative 1/4 or 2 back in. It'll still give me 0. Notice here, I'm just going to show you with negative 1/4. When I plug negative 1/4 in, I'm going to focus on the left side here. 4 times negative 1/4 is negative 1. So in that left parentheses, I'm left with negative 1 plus 1 times negative 1/4 minus 2 equals 0. Negative 1 plus 1 equals 0. And as we talked about, 0 times anything equals 0. So it doesn't even matter what's on the right side there, negative 1/4 minus 2. 0 times any number is going to be 0. So you have 0 equals 0, and that would work as a solution. Same thing would happen if I plug 2 back into the original equation. Notice how in the right parentheses, I'll have 2 minus 2 equals 0, making the whole equation again equal 0. So those are my solutions, and I'm ready to move on. So now things get a little bit trickier here. Now I want to solve x squared plus 8x plus 15 equals 0. So now I have to rewrite this in factored form first. So I'm going to set up my AC chart. I want two numbers that multiply to 15 and add up to 8. I thinking through that would be 5 times 3. 5 times 3 gives you 15. 5 plus 3 gives you 8. So those are my factors. So I'm going to rewrite this in factored form. So here, now that these are, think like the x is kind of separated out from that x squared. Now I'm going to separate out the two parentheses. I have x plus 3 equals 0 and x plus 5 equals 0. Thankfully, these ones are relatively easy to solve. They're both one-step equations. I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. X equals negative 3. I'll subtract 5 on both sides, and x equals negative 5. So my two solutions for that problem would be negative 3 and negative 5. So in the last problem we'll look at, I want to solve 4x squared minus 21x equals 18. So before I factor here, I want to make sure that all the terms are on one side first. So in order to factor, I need everything to equal 0. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to subtract 18 on both sides. Now notice here, 18 is not going to combine with anything, and that's okay. So now I'm left with 4x squared minus 21x minus 18 equals 0. Now I'm ready to factor. I have my a, b, and c values. So I'm going to make my AC chart. This one's going to be a little bit trickier because you have an a value greater than 1. I want two numbers that multiply to give me 4 times negative 18 and add up to negative 21. So 4 times negative 18 is negative 72. Again, adds up to negative 21. Thinking through that, negative 24 times 3 would work because negative 24 plus 3 gives you negative 21. So I'm going to write out my factors. Remember that when your a value is greater than 1, you need to divide by that a value. So, and if it divides nicely, I'll simplify it. 24 divided by 4 gives me 6. And 3 divided by 4 stays as a fraction, so I bump that 4 out in front of the x. Now I'm ready to separate out my parentheses. Solving for x on both sides, I would get x equals 6. And for the other solution, I would get x equals negative 3/4.